Today, Riot released more card reveals for the upcoming Guardians of the Ancient expansion, and it was not what we expected. Yesterday's reveal article said today we were getting a champion. That was not the case. They've since come out and said, hey, our timelines got crossed, which is a bit of a Zilean joke, and that makes sense because the reveals today appear to be still Zilean themed. But we did not get Zilean. Instead, we got 4 new cards. Yes, you see 5 on the screen, but one of them is a token card. We got 4 new cards. We're going to go through each of them, starting with the top left. We're going to go left to right, top to bottom. And I'm just going to go over the cards first, and then we're going to double back and talk about the theme as a whole, because really, I don't think any of these individual cards stand out too much, with maybe the exception of Clockhand. But really, it's more about the theme and then what we can infer or speculate because of the theme. So, again, left to right, top to bottom. First, we have Preservationist. This is a 5-cost 4/4 in Shurima. All the cards are in Shurima. And it says play, advance an allied landmark 3 rounds. And I know I said I wasn't going to talk about individual cards, but I'm going to make a quick exception. The Preservationist advances landmarks 3 rounds, but the Preservarium has a countdown of 2. And I don't know why that bothers me as much as it does, but that numerical disconnect between the Preservationist and the Preservarium does bother me. It's right up there with the fact that Decimate is actually worth 20% of a Nexus health value, despite the fact that the word Decimate literally means to take 10% of something. But we're not going to dwell on the naming that bothers me. We're going to move on. The second card revealed today was Imagined Possibilities. This is a 1-cost focus card. It's a spell, focus speed card, excuse me, in Shurima. And it says create a random landmark with countdown in hand, or advance your landmarks 1 round. So we either create a random landmark in hand or we advance them. But again, advance is the theme. Then we have Time in a Bottle. This is a 2-cost focus speed spell, again in Shurima. This says predict, so we get some predict support, and advance an allied landmark 2 rounds. So this gives us a little bit of that predict, helps out maybe Kahiri, but also, again, advance is the theme for today's reveals. And then the last card that they shared was the Clockhand. Clockhand is an 8-cost 4/7 in Shurima, and it says when I'm summoned, create 2 instant sentries in hand. The instant sentries, the other card on the bottom right there. And this is a 0-cost focus speed card, and it says summon a random landmark with countdown or advance a landmark 4 rounds. Now, again, key difference between this and Possibilities is that creates the random landmark in hand. Instant Sentry is instant, so it just summons a random landmark with countdown. Okay, so we have the cards out of the way. Let's talk about the theme and what it actually means, what we can infer. This tells me that whether it's Zilean or Malphite or maybe both, we're going to be getting something in the near future that is worth us advancing beyond what already exists. Because right now, the reality is the only things that have long countdown times that are worth advancing are the Sun Disk, and we already have cards that specifically target that, like Hierophant, and all of these are just an allied landmark, so these are flexible. And then we've got Frozen Thrall, and Frozen Thrall is, you know, nice. It's an 8/8 overwhelm, but the payoff of a Frozen Thrall is just not worth many of these cards. Like, you look at Preservationist, for example. This is a 5-cost 4/4. Hierophant is a 3-cost 3/4 that also advances 3 rounds, but it's just the Sun Disk. But you could say, like, okay, well, you're paying the extra cost for the flexibility, but paying 2 mana for only 1 more attack power just so that I can also hit a Frozen Thrall feels really bad. And it feels even worse when you're in a region that Frozen Thrall isn't in. So maybe this is meant to be an expedition card, but traditionally Riot has at least aimed to try to make most of their cards be playable, and this card just feels really bad in a vacuum. So I would like to think that we're going to be getting at least 1 more long countdown landmark. And what I hope, again, this is entirely a guess, right? Speculation, but what I hope it is, personally, is a time bomb. Like a legitimate time bomb. Not like, oh, it's a big bomb rare that has a long, like, I mean, time bomb. Zilean, the champion, has a time bomb. It's kind of like his signature move. Like between the time bomb and his ultimate, those are the two things you think of when you think about Zilean. And I know as somebody who hates laning against like support Zileans, for example, I just really hate time bombs. But I also am kind of excited at the prospect of playing a deck around a literal time bomb where you put it on the field and then your opponent's like racing you, advancing it. And that would make sense. It would make sense. I don't know if it's going to be a full like 20 damage alternate win con. Maybe it's only like 10 Nexus damage. Maybe it blows up the board. Maybe it's like the landmark version of Go Hard. I don't know. I kind of don't care. I just want it to be a time bomb, and I want to have a reason to play some of these cards where you are sacrificing stats and you're sacrificing keywords to advance your combo, because that's ultimately what you're doing here. Now you could say, okay, well, maybe it's also just more in general about building an archetype around landmarks that have the countdown effect, and that's why we have cards like Imagined Possibilities and Instant Sentry. And I would say yes, except for, again, all of our existing landmarks, for the most part, all of the like decently playable ones have a countdown of like 2. So something like Preservationist doesn't feel great. Something like Instant Sentry, where it says or advance a landmark 4 rounds, is, it might as well just say instantly hit one. Because like you could play the Clockhand at 8, you use your first Sentry to summon a random, you know, landmark with countdown, and it finds a star-tipped peak, and then you advance it 4 rounds. I mean, that's just popping it, right? Now, I will say this about Clockhand, and it's one of the ones I wanted to revisit. That actually might just be enough value to make Clockhand almost playable. Yes, you're paying 8, but you're getting a 4/7, and then maybe a star-tipped peak, maybe a Preservarium. Even if it's just like a Grumpy Rock Bear, you're at least getting a decent number of stats, assuming that you hit a decent random landmark with the first Sentry, and then you can instantly pop it with the second. I also like that the Instant Sentry cards are not fleeting, so you can hold on to them if you really want to, and that might be a thing that you need to do to save board space, for example, etc., etc. Or again, if this is truly a combo deck, if the time bomb is tied to Zilean, like maybe when you summon Zilean, he also makes the time bomb the way Lissandra makes a Thrall, then maybe you play Clockhand and you're holding on to your Instant Sentries until you can play your Zilean, that sort of thing. But I do like that they're not fleeting. But again, I keep coming back to the fact that it's advance a landmark 4 rounds, and so unless you're talking about Sundisk or you're talking about Thrall, there's really no use for them in that capacity. So I feel like we're going to be getting at least one more big countdown effect, maybe more, because I suspect that Malphite's going to deal with landmarks as well, personally. But I want to play whatever this archetype is, and I hope that it's good enough to warrant playing beyond just meme status, because again, right now in a vacuum, these cards are incredibly hard to judge because we don't know what the actual intended payoff is. Once we see Zilean and Malphite, I think that we'll have a better way to judge the power level of these cards. But in a vacuum right now, with just what we know about the game, they all feel pretty rough. With the exception of maybe Clockhand. So I will say this about Clockhand. If you really wanted to play a Lissandra Talia deck, Clockhand is actually not half bad, even as just an addition to existing potential archetypes there. It's not going to make that deck on par with the Shadow Isles version. The Shadow Isles version, it's got a lot of redundancy that helps with its consistency. For example, you have access to up to 7 Watchers that your opponent has to deal with between Memories and Matron, but also the cards that help you to play your combo in terms of like making fleeting versions of the Watcher, not fleeting versions, ephemeral versions of the Watcher. You also have ways to create those ice pillars the same way. So everything kind of helps you hit the pieces of the puzzle in a way that makes the Shadow Isles version very consistent, and that's why everybody kind of gravitates towards it. But what Clockhand offers in a Talia version is Clockhand offers you the way to potentially consistently level up Lissandra just by playing Clockhand. And that was why usually you're playing Trundle with Lysandra, because you're trying to make the Ice Pillar. And then if you're playing the Ionia version, you bounce the Ice Pillar back to your hand, or you bounce Trundle back to your hand with something like Go Get It or whatever it is. And then you play multiple Ice Pillars for triggering Lysandra. Clockhand gives you the option to, you know, if you play the Lysandra, then you have at least one Thrall on the board as well. Then you play Clockhand. Clockhand itself costs 8. And then you use 2 instant sentries on the Thrall. That summons another 8 cost, and then you've leveled your Lysandra while getting an 8/8 overwhelm out of it. And so while you don't have the ability to, for example, just chain a bunch of Ice Pillars and go straight from like 0/8 cost cards to all 4 and you're playing the Watcher, you do have the ability to just level up Lysandra essentially by playing 1 Clockhand while also giving yourself a good body as well. So it's a bit more threatening in the traditional like kill your Nexus stance, even if it's not like the obliterate your deck strategy. So I do like Clockhand in that regard. I also really love that the Clockhand specifically is when I'm summoned. So cards like Hourglass means that you can manipulate Clockhand and get many copies of Instant Sentry. You could also, in another potential deck, so again, thinking about future archetypes, if Zilean is another card with a potential payoff and you don't have to play Lysandra, you could end up seeing something like Zilean and Shadow Isles paired together as well, but not because of cards like Memories or Matron. Instead, what you would potentially see, oh, Matron might fit in something like that. I don't know. I'd have to theorycraft it, but you could end up seeing instead cards like Spirit's Journey or Chronicler of Ruin, where you are flickering an existing Clockhand to keep recreating Instant Sentry cards in your hand. So that could be a potential combo as well once we know whatever the other big payoff is. But it's a lot of inference. It's a lot of speculation at this point. We don't really know until we see the rest. I'm just happy to see this archetype get some more support. Happy to see another predict card because I want Kahiri to be a thing. I still hope that whatever the Zilean champion is, that it does something with predict as well or supports that archetype a little bit further. But that's it for today's video. If you made it this far, if you've listened to all of my ranting, all of my speculation, then you are a saint and I appreciate you. But that's it. So until next time, may you walk on warm sands.